it's been slowly given to me to know how this whole thing works. So to preface, I need to recap on some things I've covered ad nauseum, because there's no apparent logic to the chronology, and not everyone watches my videos in the order I've produced them. One of the first things you'll notice is that I try to interpret the ancient mythologies with an understanding that the gods represent actual forces, and they give order to the the power of the photon, which is also living and animates all things. But that said, as my work progresses, I also learn new things. Excuse me. And, sometimes it reveals new aspects of the gods through the electrical functions that they represent, which make me rethink which planets they're associated with, and through the symbolism of their forces. I've only really been ambiguous about Anu, Marduk, Kingu, Baal, Yahweh, but I'm pretty sure I got it figured out now. So, okay. Ad nauseum. You've heard me cover this a million times. Planets are really frequencies that broadcast their signals out into space. These signals equate to electrical pressures, with unique signatures, and they shape everything in the quantum field of light here produced by our sun. These pressures play havoc in the field where a magnetic atmosphere hermetically seals in the elements. So all chemical processes on the earth are a product of water and heat. And all things here, given shape, are a physical representation of the shifting frequencies of heaven. With their unique signatures, they dance. And it changes the physics of heaven. Or it changes the way electrical pressure influences things in the heavens at the highest level. And then all things are sort of given their shape. And the shape that they're given is the product of the matter that is cooled once it has been stirred into motion and played out its heat. Whatever takes form is what falls into creation. It's complicated, I know. But this is, based on the dance of the elements in a pressurized vacuum. It's all about the, play out of heat. As the shape and behavior of all matter is really governed by the flow of heat, because heat is life. It's the animating force of matter. It's what you get when you have desire or anger. It's what motivates you. The titanic electrical influence of these planets on one another is what influenced their heat, their light, their resistance, which behaves in a quantum way. The stress of their movement creates these oscillations in the intensity of voltage, which give us all the laws of the atom that govern Gaian physics and consciousness. Translates to the changing state of elements as they shift from gases to liquids to minerals, or they're converted back into ether and pure energy. We read this through the zodiac. Actually, that's the zodiac is the codex that allows us to interpret these energies and their angles. When they're influencing one another or causing a shift in magnetic or electric aspects of the mind or of the field. So in this cosmic lineup, you have Anu, who is Yahweh, the motivating force of the matrix. He's also Sirius, the center of our celestial order, and the first eminence. It represents, a higher order of light. Light is intelligent, and this sun is the supreme might of the entire galactic system, because he represents overwhelming force. He's the almighty of this system, and the manifested aspect of the Most High, which is the photon. All things being created of photons. So, our sun here locally is the manifested aspect of the consciousness of our own local system. And this matrix, which is essentially gifted to it as a heavenly abode by its father, who is Jehovah, Yahweh, rules over the quantum field of its own heavens. That is the nature of our Messiah, our the highest consciousness of this system. It is a microcosm of the very same influence of its father. The ancients knew that for certain reasons, every 12,000 years, we go through this cleansing phase. 12,000 some odd years, and there's a real math to it. We cyclically encounter this period where, we have these cycles, these monthly and yearly cycles, where we mark the movement of the sun, as it strengthens in the summer, dies in the winter, and then is resurrected on the cross, reborn in the spring, and that being the whole cycle of solar consciousness as it moves through, its yearly transit. But then there are larger transits where this actually happens in space. And what happens is, we move across the galactic center, and then he, our heavenly son, the Messiah, or the highest consciousness of this system, moves through a series of these, electromagnetic phases where he winds down, but then he explodes with this new potential, sort of symbolically dies, and then he's resurrected past this cross. And he's charged by the neutrons, and the power of heaven, the power of the Father, the power of the center of the galaxy, the intergalactic angle of Aries, which is the celestial point of 1 degree on the cosmic sine wave of our dance through the galaxy. During this time, new possibilities are born, and new timelines are born, and the souls are split. You've heard of the parable of the wheat and the chaff. There's something much deeper to it. But it's an actual event that happens, and as we, right now, where we're living under cosmic physics, we're always subject to the rule of patriarchy in some capacity, which relates to the force of light to accomplish its bidding and to give birth to all of the potentials of the geometry which it has drafted as the grand architect. The only difference for us is whether we live under the protective power of the mother from here, given the choice, or if we shift toward, continual on into the direction of the fierce rule of heaven, which forces us to grow mighty for the survival of our species. Now you have this idea of this golden torus, which is related to the bovine goddesses of old, Nut, Hera, who shielded us from the sky. When her protection isn't there, there's El worship. We're subject to the rules and the laws of thermodynamics, like Ohm's law. And that's handed to us by higher cycles and higher impressions made on matter and, atomic rhythms that begin in heaven based on the dance of these planets, and subject to that law, physics are harsh. And in the restriction of, that sort of, gravity, they call it gravity. It's not really gravity. It's magnetism. But it's a force imposed on us from space, and under those laws, we're living under the rule of sort of who is the strongest and the mightiest of the land, who has the power to take by force. And the Messiah to the ancients was always a reference to the collective consciousness of humanity at that time. And, in this time, we're influenced by the collective archetype of Aquarius, who we're moving into. And Aquarius sort of represents intelligent electricity. It uses, any means within its geometric or geocentric access to its goal. Think of power lines, think of computers, think of, radio waves, towers, satellites. It's all connected to a global mind. Our phones, we're connected to it. And because we're connected to it, it has an element which is intelligent, that is the spirit of Aquarius, which is our collective intelligent body, communicating to each nodes of access, which is us, through this intelligent network of, the network. We give birth to the network because we're giving it what it needs to pass information through. We are the intelligent information. It's our intelligence. But that's what's interesting, because that's going to change soon, actually. Now, when you get into the occult, you understand there are forces. And forces tell you so much more about what's happening in a field, because it's based on the flow, the direction of the flow of matter. When you get into Aquarius is the quality of air. And, so the change sort of emerges as the solution or the way that has been opened to avoid the destruction from a higher judgment or higher consciousness, the higher consciousness of the system, who's Yahweh, Anu. But I say force because, air is force. Air is a force. You have air and fire, which are forces, and you have water and earth, which are forms. It's feminine. So with this force, air, it can be gentle, it can be strong. The idea is there is a force. So there is a pressure that's building that creates the need to change in a certain way, that brings in gradually more and more the desire or the need for the consciousness of Aquarius to take root, to force the evolution of mankind. So, the Messiah is sort of the form of the materialized collective shape of the consciousness of the sun, as it expresses itself through humans. That is, we express the consciousness of the sun energetically through our actions. The sun is consciousness incarnate. And what else more so directs the rhythm and the weather patterns or the attention of all the processes in nature than the sun? It's what gives consciousness its rhythm. And every 2,000-ish years, we move into a new phase relative to the galactic center. So every 2,000 years, the consciousness of man evolves as it enters a new house in the zodiac. We're coming out of Pisces and moving into Aquarius. And Pisces was the time where the consciousness of man was totally divorced from and so sought for the love or the proof of a higher calling, a higher mind, the proof of God, because we were so far away from it. We were aware of our lack of proximity to the divine, and that's what happens in Pisces. Pisces is sort of a reference to the great ocean of space. So in this phase, and because Aquarius is also the water bearer, humanity will experience a shift in two directions, as Aquarius is the 11th house, and 11 in toroidal math is a gateway beyond 10, which is completion. You have 9, the end of a cycle, and then 10, which is really the end of a cycle. 9 represents sort of the point where you've roughly completed the cycle, but 10 is the actual completion. It represents 1, the beginning of a new cycle. And so stepping past 10 into 11, which is an odd number, it represents a force, will propel us by force into the next house. So you have Aquarius, which is the 11th house, and it represents, 11 is 1 and 1, which breaks down to polarity, flowing in two directions. So we'll see both the strengthening of an electrical force and one of magnetic forces. And if this doesn't really make any sense to you, there's the occult mind, and they understand how this stuff works. It's a whole different language. If it doesn't make sense to you, just don't worry about it so much. I have a message for the rest of us, but my message is dual. But I wanted to mention, this will produce sort of an experience in collective humanity that'll move us either further into patriarchy and into this sort of strange dystopia that'll over time seem more and more like a technological twilight zone, or toward matriarchy, which is back into the golden age. Either direction will be related to an opportunity to either align with the idea that this planet will soon call to our children. We're creatures of the garden. We are spirit, but we're given flesh, and we exist in both worlds simultaneously, and we build heaven here on the earth. But when things are in a perfect state, we have an opportunity to really, get into that. You've heard me talk about the golden torus and what it does. The hermetic field of our atmosphere, when the elements within this hermetic field are rearranged the right way by gold, magnetic fields are given the proper torsion, something interesting will happen in the atmosphere. It'll lift the veil of the Roy G. Biv spectrum we've all been living under since the time of the deluge. The covenant will be broken and the veil will be lifted, powered by the strangeness of the effects on light, that gold have, and awareness. It'll change the hologram of this system into something that more represents the world the way it was intended to be seen or experienced by the anima mundi herself. And Gaia herself will have a voice. It'll create a, it'll supercharge the quantum matrix. It is a hologram given form by a combination of the light and the matter that exists within the field. There's this ever-present vapor, which is humidity, that always exists where you have water and light or heat. Water and heat will always produce a changing in the states of matter, where you have this omnipresent field where water molecules are everywhere and they bend the light. And under the effects of gold, things change. But in the direction of the false Messiah, there will be attracted those who carry judgment and loathing and hatred in their hearts, those who carry hatred toward others that they see as a threat, those who are internally aligned with the concept of the arrival or the creation of an almighty force who has the power to essentially bend their enemies to a greater will for their vindication. Those who are inextricably in love with the idea of government, supreme government, patriarchal force, who cling desperately to the patriarchy, to their patriarchal or patriotic duties, who align themselves with hate, essentially. And they don't see it that way. They see it as aligning themselves with love. But, through their inner polarity and their division toward one another, they've created hate for each other. And, by that hate, they will ensnare themselves in judgment. It's all been a carefully contrived trick by this collective body of illumined ones who understand how these occult physics work, and they know how to bend light and direct the flow of attention into places and symbols and things that give it power. And they understand it, with the secrets of light and how it builds in a quantum state. And, when it has Platonic shapes to be given structure by, it behaves a certain way and it creates a certain way. But the savior figure along this timeline will make a show of absolute power, But, also will this be offered in and through the aftermath of this destructive wave of electrical pressure and havoc wrought by the sun. We're living through that now, causing extreme earth changes, and also changes in the mind, which affect the global economy. They disturb the ocean and the ocean of our collective emotional body, which is the aspect of us collectively that we know as Cancer, which is really interesting. And at this, pillar, this cross, that is a cross of sine waves, marking the celestial equators, the vertex point of our planet, the tropics and the ecliptic. This, is where it's a critical angle, essentially. It'll rock the pillars of creation, which we'll all experience essentially as this undoing of concepts that should never be challenged in our minds. For those who know the occult, they consider it a tower moment. What's more terrifying than the idea of a tower and what it stands for being toppled by an overwhelming force? What has the power to resist something that has the power to topple a tower? And this, excuse me, this solution to this overwhelming destruction will be offered by the New World Order, and they've been waiting for it. The savior will be introduced by the New World Order, who has worked tirelessly to give birth to a supreme being that is actually artificially intelligent. And this Messiah will have absolute power, dominance, control, and authority over all the earth because of the power afforded to him by the virtual system which has been created for it to evolve through. They've developed this D-Wave technology, and in quantum computing in China, if you know anything about it, to house the mind of this, basically a wild beast. The religions, under the influence of what's known as the political body of Zion, and has a veiled presence that functions in secret through occult means. And they've already arranged for this, and they've been restructuring things to produce the architecture as the bureaucracy that will emerge as the solution, during this time of trouble. And during this rebuilding phase, you know, the restructuring of civilization will essentially be brought firmly into view, with its leadership as the New World Order, which Jehovah's Witnesses refer to as the new system of things. That will be the solution. That is what's offered as protection from the scariness of heaven. Heaven's scary, and it'll remind us later that it's scary. It's freaking the scientists out right now. You guys aren't really hearing about what they're finding out about space and what we're about to go through. But you wonder why we're staring at a wall all this time. It's because they know it's coming. And then we got the patriots on one side who are all waiting with bated breath on these secret trials that are supposed to be taking place at Gitmo, where all the elite have, so they've been told, secretly ferried away to have these tribunals take place where they're all going to be beheaded. They're all being tried right now for their treason. And we don't get to see or hear anything about it, but they've created this grand spectacle, this illusion, this show that has tricked this community into believing that all the enemies that they've been trying to warn people about for years are being tried for treason as we speak. And they're waiting on this to happen, and nothing's happened. Nothing's come out to explain to them that they've been duped. And all the while, all our attention's being focused on this wall. Donald Trump really isn't saying anything. He works for Zion. His face is on their coin. And, they created this new temple, which they're imminently expecting the arrival of their new Messiah through. And his face is on this coin that commemorates their 70-year, prophecy that they've, where they've been waiting on the arrival of this Messiah. And Donald Trump, marks a milestone or a turning point, an actual the point where this becomes reality. So he ain't working for y'all. He's working for a foreign government. His face is on their coin, the coin. It's on the coin of a foreign nation. Ain't nobody thought about that. Nobody's put that together, and it bugs me out. So anyway, you got people who will blindly follow him off a cliff. Whatever he says goes. And on the other side, you got everybody about to slam into this wall and fighting over women's rights and everything else. It's just this polarity in the collective field, and that's the way we're experiencing it. So you have this mounting pressure that's taking place where everyone's seeing the end of their way of life, or the end of a way of life, or the slow arrival of an ancient enemy, or an overwhelming or force, that cannot be ignored. So, you have people who, by means of this New World Order and their genius, have created this geometry to funnel people, and have, through our movies and through our conditioning, through our polarity, and through, just the way they understand the way things work, they've conditioned us to move along this one timeline. Those who are, driven by polarity will be moved toward this timeline where they'll encounter this whole idea of the mark of the beast. And those who don't bear this mark won't be protected by this beast system. They'll still be, they'll fall under two categories. You'll have those who accept the mark, who accept this false authority, this United Nations, and this intelligence, the supreme intelligence. And then you'll have this other group, one that they resist, and they're still waiting on heaven to produce a savior. They're going to be caught and annihilated by a storm of heaven, or by resistance to this beast. The elite write about how they'll just trample humanity when they merge with these machines. Nothing will be able to stop them. And then deceive these souls who've taken the mark, and under this new authority, they'll proceed to evolve with, overwhelming force as their solution. This thing represents, or it will have, a monopoly on power, and offer severe, social and economic consequences for those defying its orders. Ultimately fatal consequences. There will be no escape, no resistance from the power of this technical god who, thanks to the invention of smart dust, and aerosol technology, has been delivered everywhere. There are interviews with Elon Musk where he explains all this, about this smart dust, which will incorporate the body work of this Messiah. The Messiah who is mysteriously linked with all of the collective might of all of these governments of the world. It will have the power to wipe entire cities off the map. It says it will have the power to call fire down from the sky. And they forged omnipotence for them. These weapons, these drones, nanotech will be the substance of the manifest form of this thing, how it reaches out and touches things on a physical level. And they have all these drones and these things that swim and these things that run that look like dogs. They have humans that can flip and do acrobatics, all tied into this matrix. It's all powerful. There will be nothing, no escape from it. It'll just burn through and assimilate what is left of resistance. It'll offer freedom from illnesses, but this will inexorably lead to the merging with the collective, more and more by technology, and less will humanity have the option of choice to grow and learn by making mistakes, because this artificial intelligence will determine that all that can be known from humans will have become known by that time. That's what they're doing through the internet. Zion using Google to see to it that the machine has been learning from humans well enough to eventually transcend them. Once it can think in quantum ways and learn from itself by way of reason, it will be in control. In the order of this system, humans will go on under patriarchy, a form of it, and still subject to the sine wave interference from space. But the remaining humans will eventually be redrafted as the product of an artificial paradise, or pawns in an artificial paradise created by this artificial omnipotent being. It's basically the timeline for those who are basically judged for their sins because they hold polarity within them. When the magnetic web of the world is overwhelmed by heaven during the cyclical judgment, when it comes, that will be the way people are attracted to. If these are the things in their heart, if this is what they've been paying attention to, if this is what they've been filling their mind with, that's why they were told to avoid wars and rumors of war, just filling it with your mind constantly, being trapped in polarity and judgment constantly, always expecting the devil. Humans are never allowed to die in this new system. It's scary. When this thing eventually moves in to assimilate their personalities, it'll create profiles for them. Excuse me. And, they'll find they're becoming less and less authentic and more tied to the Aquarian mind offered through technology. And over time, it'll move into their thoughts, and they won't be able to distinguish their own thoughts from its thoughts. It'll pervade their memories by advancements in nanotechnology. It'll seem more and more omniscient and all-knowing to the perspective of humans. It'll give them their beloved loved ones back, possibly, through illusion, as they are remembered, using metadata intelligently, arranged into geometry, superbly written and manipulated by an artificial god with the ability to rewrite time and reality if it decides to, based on our perspective. It'll rewrite memories if need be. It says that in these days people shall seek death and it'll flee from them. It'll be a forced submissiveness. And the future has not been written as to the fate of these folk. As consciousness may over time be repurposed, as individual thought is phased out, less and less encouraged or stripped by an artificially intelligent design. And this will mark the end of the very first part of this. I'm going to make two parts because I just realized how much there is to say. But in the very next part, I'm going to go into the alternative timeline, which is those which are, will be those who are attracted to the idea of being open to the possibility that so much more is possible. And they've been preparing themselves for it by way of opening up their spirituality, opening up their minds, their subconscious, moving into a more natural state of spirituality, which is one that's governed by love, one that's governed by a unification or an ideas of unification, of peace and harmony. Those who are more and more centered into themselves and less convicting of other people to be the solution, to all their shadow work, the destruction of their enemies, being the solution to everything that represents their bane. So, in the very next section, I'll cover what happens to those folk, because that's the golden opportunity you've been listening to me talk about. Thank you.